Good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone. That's streaming in via Facebook and YouTube. Let me just say hello to our people that are also on. Good evening, Clubhouse. Good evening, YouTube. Good evening, Facebook. Thank you for your patience with us today. We have had some technical difficulties, but it's all good. God is good. The Runaway is up and live. Let me tell you that we are so excited about this evening. This evening is all about you, every single viewer. We want to hear from you this evening. We want to hear your opinions. We want to hear your questions. There are so many speculations about the COVID-19 vaccine, and it's important that right now we speak truth to power. And I am so excited to see how this conversation goes. So we're going to go through some ground rules in one moment. But for now, what we're going to do is I'm just going to introduce what the Runaway is for those of you that do not know what the Runaway is. So first and foremost, welcome to the Runaway. The Runaway is a platform where we empower and encourage individuals who have left the institution of church but still desire God. My name is Bonsu-Liburd, and I am the founder and the host of the Runaway platform. So prehistorically, we have covered various topics such as the lack of social justice within the church, exploring why people are leaving the church, why is there a decline in certain churches. We've also covered things such as the African roots of Christianity, because we realize that there is such a Eurocentric narrative where the gospel is preached, and we wanted to know, how do Black people or non-white people fit into the narrative of Christianity? So we had an awesome guest, Dr. Robert Bedford, and we also had Kane Rose on for that show as well. We've also covered the topic of apologetics, and apologetics is simply the ability to defend our faith. And we had Paul Semukula, who is also on tonight, who came on to talk about if God is real, then why does evil even exist? So we've been on a break for a short while, and now we're back from our break. We went on a break because I got married. I had to plan a COVID wedding. If you ever know the drama of planning a COVID wedding, I don't wish it on anybody. And anyone that's out there that's currently planning their wedding, I'm praying for you. I'm praying grace. And yeah, just keep on smiling. And it's all about God and you and the loved one on the day. So in this season of The Runaway, we're going to be running a segment where we want to dispel absolutely every single fear, especially in a time where there is so much information and misinformation that is out there. So for this particular segment of the show, we have actually partnered with two organizations, which is the Ascension Trust and 5-2 Medics, to discuss all things the vaccine, trauma, racism, and what is the church's response to social injustice around the world. So first and foremost, I want to let you know the title of our talk today is Cure versus Chip. As we know, there's a lot of conversations around the chip. Is the chip really a ploy by the government to control us and lock us in? Or is it just what it says on the tin? Is it just a cure for the very fact of COVID-19? Now, we've seen a lot of disparity in the NHS system pertaining to people of color or non-white people. And so it's also caused a lot of distrust within our communities. But today, I want y'all to know I won't be hosting alone. I'm actually going to be co-hosting with other individuals. And my main primary focus today is the technology. So before I bring in my guests, I just want to acknowledge everyone that is commenting, and just acknowledge everyone on Clubhouse as well. Welcome, Clubhouse. And just for you all to know that we're also streaming on YouTube and we're also streaming on Facebook right now. So if you, what's it called? The kind of sign on Clubhouse, shall I say, the etiquette of Clubhouse is apparently you have to mute and unmute yourself to let me know that this conversation is really, really great. If you have any questions whilst we go along and you're in Clubhouse, please feel free to raise your hand and we will bring you on stage so you can ask your questions. Now, let me just go ahead and acknowledge some of the people that have been writing their comments. I want to say good evening, Yasmina. Good evening, Joseph. Good evening, Denzel. Good evening, Emerald as well. And to every other single person that has shouted me out and said hello. If you haven't said hello yet, please do say hello. I'm going to try as hard as I can to ensure that I keep my eye on the comments and that this conversation is as interactive as possible. Okay, so if you're on Facebook, make sure that you also shout us out, say hello. I'm going to keep saying hello to people. Hey Jerome32, hey bro, I know I owe you a phone call. Thank you, and Riyadh, for saying congratulations, and Nicole as well, thank you so much. So before we start, I'm going to say to everyone on Clubhouse, if you can ping some people into this conversation. If you're on Facebook, please do share. This conversation is really to bring you all the information you need to know from a Christian perspective. Is it the end times? Is Jesus Christ coming back ASAP, and we must get our lives in order? Or is this just another pandemic that we've seen across the world in other things such as Ebola and so forth? Tonight, I should be joined by Reverend Les Isaac, who's sadly not able to be here. But one thing I love about Reverend Les Isaac, shout him out, is that he said he wants to empower and push the voices of the millennials and Generation Z in the forefront to have this conversation. So please do keep him in your prayers. Pastor Chooks, I see you in the comments there. Good evening, sir. Good to see you also. Hey, Jenny, good to see you also. All right. So let's bring the co-hosts in. If I'm not hosting, then who's hosting alongside me? Okay, so I'm just going to slide my laptop to this side because my actual co-host is right next to me. So here we have...
Hello, everyone. Hello. My name is Mark Liburd. And for those who don't know me, I'm Esther's husband. And tonight is going to be a great night, but there is chaos happening in tech land. And both of us should have been on 2 different laptops. I should be in another room. We don't hear echoes. My screen is not working. My laptop, the camera's not working, but who cares? Nothing's going to stop tonight. We are about to do something fantastic. And I'm not co-hosting alone, but I will be co-hosting with Bejoy, who's from the Ascension Trust. And this is my brother who's going to be on tonight with us. So there's 2 of us hosting tonight. So at some point you'll see Bejoy, and he will be, there's 2 of us side by side. And we were going to ask many questions to our panelists and the team. And it's going to be an exciting day. So those on Clubhouse, listen, we'll queue you up when there's a time for you guys to ask questions. I'll tell you to get ready to lift your hands. And then you guys can, whoever's in the Clubhouse and you want to jump on and line up, raise your hands, and you'll come to the stage and be able to get your questions sorted. So we're about to go. So I don't know if Bejoy, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Bejoy. I work for the Ascension Trust, and yeah, it's a real honor and pleasure to be here. Again, blessings from Pastor Les. He's sorry that he can't be here, but he says that he's with us all in spirit, and so just wanted to say hi. But yeah, it's a real honor and a privilege. Thank you, Esther, for inviting me to be part of this journey. And yeah, I'm excited to see how this conversation grows, and just to hear the different experts, the wisdom, the inputs, and the different voices that are wanting to input into this discussion, because I think it's so key to have an understanding of where are people getting their information from.
That's fantastic. And you know what? So we are also, we've got some amazing guests on here today. So we just want to jump straight in, and we want to be speaking tonight to our resident doctor who's going to be running with us through the show. And we also have another amazing clinic that was going to be on here, a doctor in a different right, but we'll introduce him in a little while. But our resident doctor is Dr. Chi-Chi, and just want to welcome you to the platform. Dr. Chi-Chi, here she is, Dr. Chi-Chi.
Hi everyone, good evening.
Fantastic, lovely to see you. And before we kick off, I'm going to pass on over to Bejoy in a moment, but just want you just to introduce yourself, just let people know a bit of your background and who you are, what sort of work you do, so people understand that you're qualified here to come on and give some instructions here tonight.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. Well, my name is Dr. Chi-Chi Ekator. I'm a GP in South London. I'm also a GP appraiser for NHS England. I do lots of different things in the community. I'm actually involved with Ascension Trust also. I am vice chair of the organisation, and I also chair a new initiative called 52 Medics. So thank you so much for having us tonight. So I do a lot of things in the community as well as my clinical work. I've got 2 young boys at home who I take care of in my spare time, so to speak. So it's just fantastic to be here with you tonight and just to share the knowledge around COVID-19. Since the pandemic broke out, as a group, as an organization, and as individual doctors, we have been literally campaigning in our community and also really protecting frontline workers in whatever way that we can. So I am so passionate about COVID. I'm so passionate about communities such as the Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. And I'm so passionate about dispelling misinformation. So that's a little bit about me. I could go on, but we've got 4 or 5 weeks of this. So, you know, I'm really grateful that I can get to know all your listeners.
Definitely. Dr. Chichi, it's great that you can be with us and that you are going to be our house doctor on the Runaway in the coming weeks as this series continues. But just for all our listeners out there, can you please explain what is COVID-19?
Excellent. Well, thank you, Bejoy. I think that's a good place to always start off with. So COVID-19 or coronavirus disease is an infectious disease caused by a newly discovered or what we call a novel coronavirus. I mean, we do know that most people infected with the COVID-19 virus will experience mild to moderate respiratory illness and will recover without needing any treatment. However, we do know and we have seen, I mean, the news alone tells it to all of us, that there are some people who are just that little bit more vulnerable, such as older people and those with underlying health conditions, such as diabetes, chronic respiratory disease, and things like that, who were that much more vulnerable to the disease. So COVID-19 has really ravaged the world, so to speak. The COVID-19 virus is very similar to a virus that caused a disease many years ago that some of you may have heard of called SARS. Some people say they're almost cousins, and because they're so close to each other in terms of the structure and in the way they affect the body, so to speak. So as we talk about the vaccine this evening, it's important for us to recognize that the concept of developing a vaccine for the virus is not actually new. It's not that new. And in fact, scientists have been working on this technology and other similar technologies for several years. And so as we unpack things this evening, it'll be useful to delve into that background and take things forward. So I hope that answers your question, Bejoy.
Yeah, no, that's a really helpful place to start. And yeah, what is vaccine? Like, how have we gotten to a point where we now have a vaccine for COVID-19?
Fantastic. So what is the vaccine? So I think let's go back to the general thing about vaccines. If you can't hear me at any point, just point it out to me in the chat, because I'm sort of looking at the technology and hoping that everyone can hear me on Clubhouse and also all the various parts that we're streaming to, because I just don't want anyone to miss this information. So generally speaking, vaccines almost put our body through a drill that mimics an infection to help our bodies develop the immunity to fight that infection without being infected. So that's just a very simple way to define what vaccines are. So in essence, they train our bodies to develop the right weapons, so antibodies, to attack a specific invader, or as I would say, an antigen. And also they then put that invader, that specific invader, on a watch list. If you think about SAS and intelligence and how the police and specialist forces work, if you can think about the body working in such a way. So basically the vaccines stimulate the immune system to recognize and make a memory for these harmful antigens. And as I said, to put them on that watch list without actually making you sick. So the currently available coronavirus vaccines work by doing this, and they work in special ways. And the cells that people most often have heard put these antigens on the watch list. They're called your B and your T cells. So those are the important things to remember, that the vaccines help us develop memory. The vaccines help us to fight the infection with specific weapons. And I know that sometimes some patients may develop a fever or some mild discomfort after the vaccine. It doesn't mean that you've developed the infection. It just means that these officers, these fighters that your body's released, have just been sort of called into action, so to speak. So it's a sign that your immune system is working.
Brilliant. No, that's really helpful and breaks down actually how the vaccines should work, not just for COVID-19, but for other infections and other diseases that we have. But why, am I right in thinking we now have 4 vaccines? Why have we got so many?
Thank you. That's a really good question. So we've got several vaccines, and there are more vaccines in the pipeline. So I think today I just want to sort of pick the 2 main groups of vaccines. And I'm really glad that we've got a specialist in infectious diseases who can also help us unpack all of that. But I'll basically run through it. So just to whet our taste buds and give us an idea of what's happening. So the first group of vaccines, and many of you may have heard about this mRNA technology. And that's what I'll talk about to start off with. And I just wanted to clear up the myth around DNA. Does it alter our DNA? Does it do anything to our genetics? Absolutely not. So if you can think about the difference between DNA and mRNA, and there's a really, really good video that Tyler Perry and some doctors have released in the USA. So I will borrow some of their technology, because some of their terminology, because I think it's been an absolutely fantastic way to describe it. So basically, DNA is like the blueprint for your house, and RNA is like a contractor that goes in to give information about what to do with that blueprint so that the blueprint comes out right. And what the scientists have done is to map out the structure of the COVID-19 virus, so i.e. what it looks like, and they found that there's a specific protein in the virus or on the virus called the spike protein. And the way that the doctors described it is almost like a gangster spike protein. And that is a specific bit that causes infection and makes people sick once it invades the body. So what the mRNA technology that Pfizer and Moderna use is that they've made a vaccine that is just the mRNA code with the codes for that specific little spike protein. So in essence, it gives your cells a set of instructions for how to make the bit of the COVID-19 part called the spike protein. So what happens is that once your body makes these spike proteins, it will trigger an immune response that then puts COVID-19 on that watch list that I talked about, and will definitely remember and attack it when it then tries to invade your body once again. So in essence, the mRNA that people talk about is the contractor that gets into the body, tells your body to produce these spike proteins. And then your body produces these spike proteins. And then your body says, hang on, there's all these invaders, what's happening? And your body then mounts that immune response to swoop up that virus. And also, but it's not a virus, but it mounts that immune response. And then it remembers. That's the main thing. It has the memory. So that's how that main one works. Now, there's another one which we can also unpack later, which is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine as well, which is a viral vector vaccine. So we've got lots of different technology, but I won't take up too much time at this point. We will take it step by step and break it down so that everybody can understand this evening.
Brilliant. No, that's really helpful. And absolutely, I think there's in there. And there's definitely a lot more that we can go deeper in. But I believe we've also got another doctor in the line, Dr. Garrick Wilson from Imperial College London. So I'd love to hear some of his views about the vaccine as well. Dr. Garrick, are you with us? There you are. Oh, sorry. I think the gremlins are in the system again, Dr. Garrick. We can't hear you. think you're... Are you muted at all?
Well,
how about now? Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, welcome, Dr. Garrick.
Okay, good evening. Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. I got quite flustered there. Please remind me, what was the question?
Sure, no, not a problem. Yeah, I want you working at Imperial College in London. And am I right in thinking you've been working closely with developing some of the vaccine and the technology that's been involved? What are your views on the vaccine?
Right. Thank you for that question. So briefly, just to say what I do work for Imperial College London, the Institute of Cancer Research, and also across the Royal Marsden NHS Trust. And I'm sorry, I'm getting quite a lot of feedback. So part of my day job really is about looking at the big cancers in the world and tackling those big cancers. And I have oversight for this program called Convergence Science, which is the amalgamation or the merging of physics, chemistry, mathematics, computer sciences, engineering, to answer and tackle the big challenges or the big problems in cancer. So that's part of what I do. On top of that, I also have oversight for training what is quite a unique group of individuals. These are our future cancer doctors who will bring innovation to the clinic. And on top of that as well, I do also work in infectious diseases, and I'm trained as a virologist in my background, received core training with the World Health Organization and Public Health England. And so I've got quite a lot of experience working with things like bloodborne and also airborne viruses as well. So when I say bloodborne, I'm talking about viruses that are transmitted through the blood, so things like HIV virus and also hepatitis viruses. And also airborne viruses is pretty much what COVID-19 is that it is a droplet that can be spread around or dispersed through the air, and that's how people normally pick up that infections. So in terms of your question on what do I think on the vaccines, I think the vaccines are a good thing. I'm fortunate in the position that I am in to have access to behind the scene areas, whether these be research labs or individuals who are working on these vaccines, to actually get a first-hand experience of what's going on behind the scenes and not just what is being told to us through the media. And this is where I base my conclusion on, in that the vaccines are a good thing, because I've seen firsthand some of the development that has gone in behind the scenes. And these are technologies that I'm quite familiar with, having been trained in this area as well, in terms of how they work, in terms of what their efficacy and their feasibility are. And they're not anything novel, as Dr. Chichi said earlier. These are things that have been worked on behind the scenes for quite a significant period of time now, in preparation or anticipation that something like this would eventually come along. And one thing I also want to say is that this pandemic to virologists is not a surprise. There's always people working in prediction algorithms, even from earlier on as the 1970s, that at some point in our history, there would have been a global pandemic. And of course, preparation was going on behind the scenes in terms of how we would respond to this when it comes about. So I hope that answers your question. From my perspective, having seen what's going on behind the scenes, I am convinced that these vaccines are a good thing.
No, that's great. And like you said, it's good to have somebody who's working behind the scenes to see physically how these things are being put in production. So we have that perspective as well.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And we are actually really getting a lot of questions coming in, and we definitely want to go to the different platforms that we are on. So those who are on Clubhouse, please start to raise your hands, because Clubhouse works a bit different from all the video platforms that we're on today. And if anyone has any questions on Clubhouse, raise your hands and we'll bring you to the stage. For the doctors in the house, we've had a question. It says here that we're in a place of a lot of fake news around the world, and the legacy of the medical racism and exploitation. How does anyone trust any of the many different pieces of advice we hear? So either Dr. Chichi or Dr. Garrick, can you?
That's a really good question, and I think that probably it would be really great for both of us to answer that. I think that is exactly the purpose of this evening. You know, we want people to see that there are doctors from ethnic minority communities who are trying to share the correct piece of information. There's a lot of information that we're seeing on YouTube, seeing on WhatsApp. Somebody just pulls up a laptop and gives all this information that people hold so strongly. So I know that there is genuine injustices that have happened in the past. We are not disregarding that at all. But what we want to say to people who are listening, who are listening now or who will listen later, is that we want you to protect yourselves. We have looked at the evidence. We are working on the ground. We are seeing people dying, and we want communities to protect themselves. You know, so we're not saying that things haven't happened in the past, but what we are saying is COVID is real. It's real. It's touching communities. Personally, I have lost 3 aunts in 3 months, and it's not something to joke with. So if one life is saved through this conversation, just to say, look, we are Black doctors, we are telling you the truth, you know, as we know it, so that you can protect yourself and your family. So that's something I just want to share. I don't know what you have to say, Dr. Garrick, to the question.
I think you're absolutely right, Dr. Chichi. I hope you can hear me again. Okay, sorry. Okay, I think you're absolutely right, Dr. Chichi. And I think it's important for people to see, especially people from the Black community, to see people that looks like them working in these professions. Because yes, there is a checkered history of malpractice, especially when it comes to development of new medicines. And I can name several examples. One being that springs to mind is one that took place in northern Nigeria in 1996. And that was involving Pfizer, who's one of the vaccine developers and one of the vaccine makers currently, in that they developed an anti-meningitis drug, which they were trialing on African children, which led to a number of deaths and severe disability in some children. When some of the parents were asked about this, they said they didn't know their children were enrolled in a clinical trial. So there is this view in some parts of the scientific research community that Africa is a wide testing ground or a ready testing ground for new medicines, simply because it's got a large population, and also it's cheaper to do medical research or clinical trials in those areas than it is to do it in the Western world. So there are those who will actually propagate this narrative that it's best to trial new medicines in the African population. And we'd have seen that sometime last year when French scientists in particular suggest that we should first test or trial the COVID vaccines in people of African heritage, which was absolutely ludicrous to even suggest in the first place. But I also want to say to you, as much as there are those factions in the scientific community, by and large, the scientific community is one driven by ethics, is one driven by integrity and a sort of research reproducibility aspect. And if you think about it, a lot of academic institutions are involved in the development of this vaccine. So for example, Oxford University, with a worldwide reputation, it's bad for them if this turns out wrong. Because they're not a pharma company trying to make a profit per se. They're an educational institution which government themselves, and we as taxpayers would pour a lot of money into institutions such as that. So it would be bad for them to actually just see this as a profit-making tool, but also just to see it as something that could save humanity, that could save people and stop lives being put at risk. And this is what's going on here. As Dr. Chichi said, the virus is real. I have gone into the lab myself. I've looked down a microscope. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've looked at the genetic sequencing of the virus. And what I'm talking about when I say genetic sequence, we are all made up of genes and DNA, as Dr. Chichi explained earlier. And that can be looked at as a computer screen, as a code, numbers of letters, A, T, C, G. I don't need to tell you what all of those means, but that, when you read it, can give you a lot of information as to exactly what you're looking at. I've looked at it, and I'm convinced that there is a virus. I'm convinced that it didn't exist in the human population before recently. And so we're dealing with something that is quite new, quite novel. And this is why it's affected us so badly, in that the human population rather have not seen it before. And therefore, it's taken our bodies some time to be able to mount an adequate immune response against it. And that's why vaccines are so important in the interim, then, to train our immune systems to react and to respond appropriately to something that is quite new.
That's amazing. And you know, we have loads of questions that are rolling in. Okay, and one of the questions I had earlier today, which backs onto what you've been talking about, was like looking at the Pfizer, the vaccine, and people saying how it was tested on children and so forth. Can you bring some clarity specifically on these? We've got the AstraZeneca and we have the Pfizer, which UK is using right now. So just bring some clarity for people at home who says, I will not take anything like that because of the ethical issues that's going around that vaccine.
And I think people are right to raise concerns when it comes to ethics, especially for those from a Christian perspective. It is absolutely right that we place this within a sort of theological ethics setting to make sure that we're doing what is right, not just by ourselves, but in the context of our faith as well. I will say within the UK currently, 3 vaccines, if I'm correct, has been licensed for approval for usage. Currently, however, only 2 of those are in use, and that is the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and also the AstraZeneca-Oxford vaccine. The other one which was approved is the Moderna vaccine, but although we have made orders for that, that's not delivered yet, and therefore it's not in use. I think at this moment, the idea is that there isn't a sort of like ready way for you to pick and choose which vaccine you want to take, unless when you turn up, and I don't know if Dr. Chichi will say otherwise, unless when you turn up to a vaccination center, there is a reason for you to have one vaccine over the other. There isn't a way to choose or pick and choose at the moment. What I will say to you in terms of thinking about ethics, in terms of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, that's been based on a viral vector scenario, which is more of a sort of classical way of developing a vaccine. And I think one of the things people are concerned about concerning the ethics of this is whether or not fetal cells is being used in the development of this particular vaccine. And the answer is no. None of the vaccines so far have used any sort of fetal cells in their development. So think about that when you're thinking about ethics. And it's also useful to distinguish between the use of fetal cells in a lab setting to test how well a treatment will work versus the use of fetal cells in the development of that treatment. And this is the distinction that we need to make here concerning that. Concerning the Pfizer mRNA vaccine, which was explained incredibly well earlier by Dr. Chichi, what we have there is a small piece of message to make the virus spike protein. And that is coated in oil droplets. And the reason why that is coated in an oil droplet is to stop it from degrading once it goes into your body. The temperature is much higher in your body than it is outside. And genetic material, which RNA is easily susceptible to high temperature, and it will degrade easily. By coating it in a piece of oil droplet, it allows it to get into the body without degrading quickly, and then it allows the body's machinery, and our bodies are incredible in that it can take that information, and that's why it's called mRNA, messenger RNA. It's a message. It carries a message to make the spike protein, and our bodies are really good at reading and deciphering that information and then making what that information tells it to make. And that's been explained so well early on. So I will say concerning ethics, I would say a better way to look at this is, what would happen if herd immunity is achieved in the white population, and this virus is still left to run rampant within the Black communities, Black and Asian minority communities? What would the right thing there be to do? What would happen if new variants keep coming through, which mutate all the time and affect the Black community more disproportionately than it was affected in the first wave? So when you're considering ethics, consider these things as well, in that we may be left in a situation, if we do not take these vaccines, we may be left in a situation whereby our community is still disproportionately affected by this virus, whilst the white community has achieved herd immunity.
And just to add, Mark, I think that's really interesting what you said, Dr. Garrick. I was listening to another webinar or discussion on Clubhouse by some US doctors, and they were actually saying that in some of the communities that are largely populated by Black people, because their healthcare system is slightly different, so I'm just quoting what they said, is that actually the pharma companies are not delivering enough of the vaccines for some of those communities. And then there is that danger that actually these communities that aren't coming forward for the vaccines are disadvantaging themselves even more. So I think that as we listen to this talk this evening and have discussions, it's important to know that we are a global society. My brother lives in Dallas, and my nieces, my sister-in-law's got a baby on the way. I've got more family in America. I've got family in Nigeria. As I've said, I've lost 2 aunts in Nigeria. So we need to understand that this is a conversation that we need to take forward to our families everywhere, because we're privileged in the UK. We've got the NHS. We things are fair. We are fair. Things are fair here. There is fair access that is not quite the same elsewhere globally. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you very much. And this is fantastic. We just want to welcome all the new listeners who have just logged in live on our video streaming platforms, and those who are in Clubhouse. We are grateful for you logging in, and we can see the questions rolling in. And thank you for all the congratulations and all that we're getting from everyone on the link. Yeah, wow. Hey. Today we are talking vaccines. We ain't got time for that, but we thank you very much for that. But you know what, guys? We have got some other people are on our platform today. Some panelists. Got a young guy who's actually coming here to just represent the voices from the Gen Z. When we say Gen Z, we're talking about the youngers who are like from 23 years down. So we're talking about the younger generation. So we are just welcoming everybody, and he's going to have a chance to share something in a minute. But if you can, wherever you are, just press that share button, share this information out, share it. Why are we trying to just convince people just to take the vaccine? We're not here just to convince people. We're here to just give you facts and truth. So that's why we're inviting you here to ask as many questions as you can, and we'll try and deliver those. We're not just talking about just the vaccine, but also some of you are here to hear, look, is this even just the end times? What sort of things going on here? I'm very skeptical of what's going on, because maybe this is a mission creep from the government trying to get us involved in some program that eventually is going to become something where it comes like, because we believe we're in the end times. We will be covering that also, and we have some a reverend on, a couple of reverends on. We have a pastor of a church who's in apologetics. Guys, do not move. We will come to those things. But going straight over to Raekwan. Yes, this is our young general who's on our show today. Lovely to see you guys.
It's great to be here.
So, I mean, Raekwan, just even just hearing some of the information, coming from our doctors are giving us truth, giving us information, background on this COVID. I don't know, with your generation, what's going on out there? What's the voices? Are people afraid? Are people saying they're taking it? Is it just they're cool with it? What's going on?
I feel like in general, like outside of talking about COVID and just in life, I feel like our generation has been desensitized completely. So I feel there's parts of it when we're talking about COVID, for a lot of people just busting jokes because they don't take it seriously. Other people are there who have witnessed all of the deaths, who have had family members pass away, and those are the ones who are taking it more seriously. But at the same time, I know that with all of the WhatsApp doctors, all of the Facebook doctors, I don't know if their PhDs are licensed or not, but they're coming with all these different things, and I feel like even the other day I'm seeing memes where it's like, oh great, another person's just sent me another WhatsApp doctor's point of view, and I feel like it debunks whatever people are thinking about in the vaccine, and it stops them from actually thinking about it properly. I know for me personally, I feel like for some of my friends, I'm not going to take the vaccine. I'll be honest, because I feel at the moment, at my age, although for the second variant, and I know you're going to go into all that stuff, but for the second variant, I know young people are more affected, but I feel there's more, is more dangerous for the old generations to not take the vaccine than it is for my generation. I know a lot of people have that same view in my generation, but yeah.
It's so good to have you on the show and to hear such a, the way you passionately speak and so eloquent, a young lad like you, I think that's fantastic. But what I wanted to say, Raekwan, is, I know that you know, you don't want to take the vaccine, and obviously you're quite low down the list, you know, because there's a waiting list, isn't there? But what I wanted to say is the most important thing we need to remember also is that we protect the people around us. And I think that I have seen things happen in my family that possibly, contributed to the loss of my family back home in Nigeria. So it's important we recognize that vaccination isn't just about protecting you, but about your grandma, your mom, your auntie that you like to hug, and you should rightly want to hug them at some point. You know, that's human contact that we're missing for ages. You've been missing that. So this vaccine, this COVID, what it's taught us all, taught me as a doctor, taught me as a Christian, is the importance of human fellowship. And so as we think about it, let's also think about yourself, but others around you. That's my take on it. But you've got quite a while to decide.
Oh yeah, I feel like generally I get that vaccination in general it's more of a selfless act, because you're doing it because you know once you're vaccinated, you're saving people around you, and I generally understand that. And I'm not one to say I'm against vaccinations, because I know vaccinations have saved lives from before COVID, with all of the different epidemics and horrible diseases that have come through the world. So I'm just saying that for me personally, when it comes to the vaccine, I generally think with all the vulnerable people that there are, it's safe for them. I think they're better off taking the vaccine. But for me personally, I just think right now I'm not comfortable enough to take any of the vaccines that are there.
Okay,
thank you.
Raekwan. Maybe Dr. Garrick, you can share some light in there.
Absolutely, thank you, Raekwan.
You're on mute on Clubhouse. We can't hear you, but
can you hear me?
Fantastic, we can hear you. Yes,
okay,
we've got volume.
Thank you, Raekwan. I'll get the hang of this in a minute. I think you make some great points. One thing I will say to people as well is that whenever you get a message through WhatsApp or any of the social media platforms, before you pass that on and share it, pause and think, where did this come from? Who did this come from? Are they a credible source of information and knowledge? And I don't care if they're the most anointed in your church. It doesn't give them the right to sort of pass something on as medical or science fact. So I think that's something to be clear about. Secondly, I think within people of your generation, there's a bigger issue at play here, and it's one of trust, especially within the government. And perhaps it could be argued that they've not done the best to handle the transmission and sort of the containment of the virus, in that there was a lockdown and then it was eased and people could go back to the pubs and get drunk and then just mingle and all of that and so on. And then, oh, you're going back into lockdown again, and then you can go to school and then you can't go to school. So all these mixed messages makes it quite hard to keep abreast of or to keep on top of. And therefore, after a while, you just lose interest. And of course, there was at one point as well, there was this sort of idea that was being pushed around that this is a virus that affects elderly people and those who are clinically vulnerable only. So if you're young and you're fit and you're healthy, then you are okay. And perhaps you can just go out there and naturally get infected, and you will just have herd immunity to it because you would have generated the antibodies that would be required to protect you against it. But ultimately, that wasn't the case. As we learn more about this virus, younger people are being presented in the hospitals as well. And some of them ending up in intensive care units, struggling to breathe on ventilators. So this is a virus that affects all age groups, whether you're fit, unfit, underlying health conditions or not. We're not quite sure why it does that to some people and yet not to others, but nonetheless, it still affects all age groups. And so in thinking about whether or not to take the vaccine, as Doctor said earlier, consider those around you as well. It's not just for you. And also consider whether or not this is a decision that you're making, or whether or not it's the populist view of a segment of maybe popular culture or social media that is driving a particular narrative that is feeding misinformation. What I'm trying to say to you is make the decision based on the best possible knowledge available, and not on a sort of I don't know, pseudo conclusion. And I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm not belittling your intelligence, but just make sure that you have all the facts, all the right information, and anything that you're uncertain about, do reach out to people who will know about that and ask the questions.
Yeah.
I don't think we can hear you.
We can't hear you, Mark. There we go.
Yeah. Wonderful.
I can't hear you on.
Yep, can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. This is a fantastic discussion. And you know what, Raekwan, thank you so much even just for sharing, because sometimes we never get to hear the voices of the younger ones. And we want you to stay online with us, and any other sort of questions you have, jump in. For those who have just joined in on our visual platforms, welcome, welcome, welcome. Please put your questions in the chat. We've seen them come through. We will answer some of the questions that have come through. And those who are on Clubhouse, please do ping away at your Clubhouse, ping everyone else in. Raise your hands if you need any, if you've got any questions, and we will bring you to the stage. What's the question there? So we have got a question on Clubhouse. So we will take that live because it's a voice question. So 1 second, we'll bring them, and you will hear the question and who it's directed to.
Question from Raekwan's point about the fact that if you're young and healthy and you don't want to take the vaccine because you know, like, you're not very vulnerable, so it should be like vulnerable people who take it. And then Doctor, can't remember your name, sorry. Doctor said that we should think about others and the fact that we're all a community, and obviously right now this like basically if more people were to kind of take the vaccine, I'm not saying this is exactly your words, but I guess the general idea is that if more people are to take the vaccine and everyone's kind of protected, then we can move on from this whole situation quicker. But my question was basically that if someone who feels like they're young and healthy doesn't take the vaccine, how does that affect people who are vulnerable and decide that they should take the vaccine? Why do young, healthy people whose bodies could probably fight off the vaccine need to take it? If all the vulnerable people took the vaccine, then surely they would be defended against it when they're around others who had it. Is that not the case? Or, yeah, that was my question, basically.
Did you want to jump in there, Dr. Garrick?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your question. My response to that is simple. You do make a good point about that, in that if the elderly population is already protected, then it's okay for young people not to get it because they probably won't affect them. But what I will say as well is that younger people do get the virus as well, and younger people do get severe COVID disease from the virus as well. And we don't know which young people is going to young person is going to end up in the intensive care unit. There's no way of predicting or telling that. So you have to think about it from that balanced approach as well, that although you may be young and healthy, this virus could take you out. And one thing that we do know about this virus is that it's mutating at a very high rate. We only hear of the mutations that are currently of significance, whether they be they're transmitting much quicker or they're resisting the vaccines. But a lot of mutations are taking place all the time, in that over 100 mutations, I believe, are in this virus already. Some of them are just negligible, so they will do nothing. But the fact is, it's unstable. These mutations take place because the viral genome is unstable, which means every time it replicates itself, it produces a new version of itself. And there are some proofreading proteins, we call them enzymes, that are supposed to meant to correct those errors, but they themselves don't often do a good job in correcting the errors, and therefore we get these new mutations and variations taking place. What I'm trying to say to you is, it could be that we mutate and we have a situation whereby even younger, fitter people now, there's a version of the virus that will come about that will impact and that will affect. God forbid. However, I'm just saying there is no foolproof way of saying that you as a young person will resist what this virus is able to do. And so we should not just see it as a virus that affects the elderly, but also a virus that affects the wider population in general.
Absolutely. And I think that's why we're still having to obviously speak to our communities and diverse communities, because there are still many people who are vulnerable also who have refused the vaccine. So there is still a lot of work to be done for a wide range of age groups.
Yeah, definitely. And I just
Bejoy, I think you're on mute.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Cool. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something that Raekwan said earlier, which I found fascinating, is that the young generation and he himself are desensitized to the news and the press and the media that's going out. And so you're looking for information from a variety of different sources. But Raekwan, can you just say, how do you make the decision to trust a bit of information? What are some of the checks and the balances that you put in place to make sure actually this is why I've come to this decision?
So for me personally, if I see anything come through WhatsApp, if I don't see an NHS label on it, I'm not looking at it. I feel like the desensitization, it's like I said, it's been from before COVID, because even when we look at the Black Lives Matter movements and the fact that the media is able to play out videos of people's deaths and people are able to watch it and it's able to go viral for change to happen, it shows to you that this generation is desensitized, because there was a time where people could not watch these things. So I feel like that's where the desensitization has come in. So now, when there's all these adverts and there's the promotion saying, not promotions, but and all this information coming out saying, this is what it is, this is the damage it does, a lot of people aren't taking on that effect of it because they've seen it so many times before, and the media's overplayed so many tragedies, and they're playing it just like it's a kid playing chopsticks video, and they're willing to play it without thinking how's that going to affect people. So for me, when it's about information, I will stick to the NHS, but also I have to admit, Dr. Garrick, I've listened to interviews you've done, and I've listened to the things he's said, knowing that I know that Dr. Garrick comes from a sound background, and I've heard him preach, I've heard him speak, I've heard his interviews, and the information he said, he's never one to actually say something if he does not believe it. So it's people that I know are willing to say, I trust it, but that are then allowing me to, okay, I can see where that's coming from. Because I generally do believe the vaccine is a good thing. And I'm not saying I'm not saying don't take it, it's horrible. And I'm not saying take it, you have to take it, because I believe things that have been done around the vaccine, I'm fuming. Like, there's things that they've put in place that they're turning a Western country into somewhere that we shun for doing the same things, but somehow we've allowed this to happen, where people are saying, where the government's saying in some sense, you can't leave the country unless you have this vaccine, you can't do XYZ unless you've had this vaccine. To me, I think I just can't agree with that, and that's where part of my problem with all of this comes in.
If I may briefly respond to that, I think it's a great point you make, Raekwan, and I think our civil liberties are pretty much at threat here. You're right in that to say we can't leave the country unless we have a so-called vaccine passport, which is likely to be instituted, is just not democratic at all. And to tell us that in order to do things and move about in life, we have to adhere and to take a particular medicine is not the same as saying, I'm encouraging you to take the medicines because this is the benefits of taking the medicines. It's almost now I am actually putting legislation and putting some sort of draconian system on you to force you into compliance. And I think that's the wrong way to go about it, because ultimately individuals will always rebel against that. And I think that's just wrong altogether. Let's just put it like this. Vaccines throughout history have been good at eradicating a number of significant and severe diseases. Two that springs to mind immediately are polio and smallpox. Vaccines have eradicated them. And in 1997, there was this doctor called Andrew Wakefield who linked autism between the MMR vaccine and autism to the MMR vaccine rather. And as a result, that was propagated throughout the media. And as a result, a lot of parents lost interest or confidence in vaccines, which I believe has contributed to where we are right now. But the way it's being handled, the way it's being politicized, never before in history, and I've read, never before in history have I ever seen a particular vaccine or medical development being this politicized. And I think that's part of the issue, in that we cannot gain the confidence of people, especially people who've already been traumatized by inherences in the history of medical research. We cannot get them to have confidence if we're impacting on their civil liberties through political will.
Okay, so where we are now, we've got, where we are now, we have loads and loads of questions, and we need to fire through as many questions as possible. And we have more guys on the panel, which we're going to start getting into a bit of the theology behind some of the thinking through the paranoia of what we've got right now. So one of the first questions I'm going to ask is, why can you then get, after you've got the vaccine, still get coronavirus?
And that question came in from Eileen J. Christie. Thank you for your question.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant question. Whilst a vaccine, or the vaccine, is designed to train your immune system to fight against the virus, the vaccine doesn't stop you from getting the virus. The vaccine is meant to stop you from developing the significant impact that the virus could have on your body. So the disease caused by the virus. So you may be a carrier of the virus, but you're not experiencing the symptoms, and therefore you're not severely affected by it. And that's really what the vaccines that are currently out there will do. But by virtue of being a carrier of the virus, it is likely that you will still be able to transmit that virus to somebody else. And I use the word likely here because it's not yet fully known, and ongoing studies are there right now and are taking place right now to sort of ascertain if that is the case. If not only do you get protection from the effects of the virus, but also whether or not the vaccine will be able to sort of limit you from passing on that virus to other people. So what I think it's good to make the distinction that getting the virus is different to getting the symptoms and the disease caused by the virus.
Okay, we have another question.
Back to you, host.
Yes, thank you. We have another question. It says, Chinese people have been wearing masks way before COVID-19. Why? Because they know it stops viruses. That's better. That was better protection for them. Was there something going on, some sort of parallel that Chinese already had masks on a long time before we were starting to wear masks? Yes, please.
Okay. I think that what COVID has done is changed our way of life. You know, I can't imagine when I will go into a public space that's not ventilated, with lots of people coughing or sneezing, or in flu season, without wearing a mask going forward. I can't imagine that time, because we have been sensitized, if I can use that word again, to actually be more aware of viruses and be more aware of our environment. So just remember that the SARS disease, or the virus that caused the SARS outbreak happened many years ago in that region of the world. And some of you may remember it, some of you may not, but it was, you know, broadcasted to us in the news. We saw people wearing masks at that time. We saw how it ravaged the society and obviously their way of living at that time. So therefore, that's left that remnant on their society, as I'm sure it will leave a remnant for us, that we're more sensitized to viruses and these pathogens in our environment. So, you know, I certainly be wearing my mask for a very long time, and that is what we will still encourage, because as Dr. Garrick said, transmission is something that's still being studied. It doesn't mean that you can't continue to be a carrier and transmit, even if you don't have a severe infection once vaccinated.
I'll just briefly add to that as well, and you're right, Dr. Chichi, in that as Chinese culture has been much more sort of trained over the years in mask wearing. As you've rightly said, the SARS virus would have also been involved in that region. But we also know from a virology history that viruses such as H5N1, bird flu, H2N2, swine flu, you may remember swine flu and bird flu. These viruses are also coming from regions in China. So again, individuals within China would have had a long history of dealing with viruses that are transmitted airborne, and therefore they would have also had a policy, sort of a cultural policy, I suppose, of wearing face coverings. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, yeah, we have loads and loads of questions just firing in. And what we're getting from the questions are basically, I think a lot of people are not convinced and feel very paranoid around one, the speed of how people are being pushed into taking vaccines, the aggressiveness of it, and as I said, we have loads of different sort of conspiracy stuff, which is what Raekwan was mentioning. I think that the Pfizer, where there was talking about being made from abroad, and a lot of people are talking about the whole Bill Gates thing and him being involved in technology. Is it possible for with this vaccine or any of the vaccines for it to actually be able to physically put a nanochip or anything like that into any of the vaccines?
So if I may go.
Yeah.
The quick answer is it is not unfeasible to put a nanoparticle, not a nanochip. And we're talking about things of sort of really, really tiny, small scale that you cannot see with the naked eye. It's not unfeasible that could be delivered into a human being through a vaccine. So that's not at all unfeasible. I suppose the distinction then is, does any of these vaccines carry nanoparticles that are being sort of injected in the human body? I don't think so. I suppose the question then is why? What would the purpose of that be? And why use the vaccines to do this when there are so many other means that would have been less conspicuous to have done this through? So I don't think the vaccines themselves are used in this regard. And also remember, these vaccines are coming from different sources, different companies who have different interests. Which of the vaccines in particular would contain these nanochips from Bill Gates? Which of them does he have control over? So all these things you have to begin to look at. And I also say if a nanoparticle in the form of a chip was delivered into the human body, there's a question of where exactly would it go? How stable would it be in that environment? When will our physiology actually be able to just degrade it and destroy it? How will it work, and all these kind of things? So I think there's a long way to go to say we can deliver a nanochip to somebody's body and it actually does something that we want it to do, especially when delivered in the form of a vaccine. Certainly from what I've seen behind the scenes, especially with the vaccines that are being built here in the UK, the Oxford AstraZeneca one, I can categorically say that I've not seen anything that's gone into it that resembles any form of nanoparticles that you can then call a nanochip.
Thank you. That's a nice answer. And, you know, just for those who've been joining in, we've been talking about the vaccine, looking at some of the information that Doc's just giving you facts about the vaccine. And I know there are many of you out here who are maybe not being convinced about this vaccine and maybe the agenda of why this vaccine is here and why we're being pressed into taking this vaccine. So, you know, some of the things that we're looking at is today also the whole purpose of this is about the cure versus chip. I would say chip, it could have been any sort of background. So we say chip because that is being the mindset of these end times. And a lot of people have been talking about this feels like the end times, and it feels like there's something going on here. There's an agenda being pushed, and maybe this conspiracy around the vaccine could be like the beginning, or maybe maybe the mark of the beast. And I want to kind of bring some more of our panelists in as we've been going to throw out a few more questions. We will come back to some questions that have been asked, but there've been so many, but we don't want to lose the whole essence of our conversation as well. So we have today we have our Reverend Phil Barnard, and I just want just quick introduction to yourself, sir, so people know who you are and what you do.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's nice to be with you today. Been very interested to listen to the discussion thus far. Yeah, my name's Phil Barnard. I'm regional team leader of what's called London Baptist, formerly known as the London Baptist Association, and I oversee, as part of a team, 300 or so Baptist churches across the great capital city of which we're a part. So that's my job. And obviously, I'm very interested in this particular issue. We're seeing places of worship used for vaccination, and churches which are trying to encourage their people to engage in this process. We recognise there are concerns, and there are historic concerns about this. But for me, this is an important issue, and that's why I'm here tonight.
Okay, and we also have our Reverend Alton Bell on.
Hi, good evening.
Hello.
Mark and Esther.
We have our Reverend Alton Bell on, and just quickly explain who you are and what you do, sir.
Hi, good evening. I am the senior pastor at Wembley Family Church. I previously was a industrial chemist, and I also worked in the IT industry for 15 years or so. I run an IT company, and I'm a theologian as well. I've got a degree in theology. So this is I'm very interested to talk about not just the end times, but the vaccine, and also why there is vaccine hesitancy amongst particularly our Black communities. And also look at some of to debunking some of the myths that people are pushing out there on social media.
Fantastic. Also, and also I would like to bring on also Paul Semukula, who is also a pastor over a church, and also well, let me introduce yourself, sir. Introduce yourself, so we just got to understand who's on.
Sorry, Paul, we can't hear you properly. Sorry, Paul, we can't hear you properly. Paul?
Paul, can you hear us?
Oh dear.
Out there. Obviously, we've talked from a medical point of view. It'd be really good to hear from a theological point of view. If I can start with Reverend Phil Barnard, and just, what are your thoughts about end times And is this the end? Is this the start of Revelations and what's happening?
Well, thanks, Dr. Chi-Chi. I mean, it's an interesting question, isn't it? You know, are we in the end times? And, you know, what are the signs of the times? I mean, the fact is, you know, Christians have believed that we've been in the end times since Jesus ascended into heaven. And we've been waiting for a long time since then. There have been many dark days that the world has experienced throughout that time. This is just the latest, and of course it's one that's profoundly affected our life here in the UK and across the world. It's obvious to, you know, question that issue being the end times. At the end of the day, we don't know. You know, Jesus makes it very clear, even when he was ministering, that nobody knows the time. Only the Father knows the time. Even he didn't know the time. That was a question that he asked. That, of course, we talk about the return of Christ. Yes, there are things that are written in the scriptures, but, you know, for me, I do not believe that this is a sea change in the end times. You know, it may be something, but not necessarily something that can correlate to that within the scriptures.
Okay.
I suppose one question that I want
to... Bejoy. We can't hear you, Bejoy. Do you want to turn your volume on?
How about now? Am I coming through?
We've got our host back now.
Can you hear us?
We can't hear you. That's it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you all now.
Brilliant. The question I wanted to ask the panel is there a biblical basis for whether we should take the vaccine or not?
You will take that?
Well, I'll jump in if you like. Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. No, I mean, you know, I think what has already been said, I think that we have a responsibility as Christians towards our fellow people. And that, you know, we have a responsibility to be people of peace and people of love and compassion and mercy and justice in this world. And we have to, you know, recognize that our effects on other people and the decisions that we make are very significant, and believe that actually that's a very important part of our witness. You know, churches, some would say we've been shut on and off for the last year. Well, we haven't, because actually we've been at work, scattered in the community, doing all sorts of wonderful things. We're church scattered now, not church gathered. And I think a big part of our witness to the community, you know, one of my churches closed at Christmas, and they had a big debate about it in church. You know, should we? You know, we've got to open for Christmas. And they closed. And, you know, the neighbours of that church in a residential home who don't go to church says, thank you for thinking of us in the local community. Thank you for thinking more than yourselves. So I do believe we have a responsibility to act responsibly in taking the vaccine.
Okay, there are already more questions that are coming in, but one of the things that I've been talking to quite a few people around this topic, and people have even reminded me of, and maybe depending on what sort of backgrounds people have come from, but in the early, like in the 90s, there was a man called Barry Smith who brought out a lot of prophecies, even though he may have said that he may not have been, you know, he didn't claim to be a prophet, but there was a lot of prophecies around the end times and around the chip, or the RFID chip, and how that was going to come forth in the future. And I think people have always been looking out for this chip and there's a paranoia around when is this system going to be put in place, because according to Revelations, they say that it's going to be that system that's not allowing us to buy or sell anything, and it will come through this RFID chip. So can someone maybe talk, I don't know, Pastor Alton or Reverend Phil or even Paul, whoever wants to come on board on this, is there any kind of grounding from what the book of Revelation is saying? And is there any grounding in that people can say, you know what, there is no such thing that's coming, there is no such thing as a mark of the beast actually ready to take us over, so the paranoia will go away, or is there a point of the mark of the beast still to come?
Well, if I could come in there, if
we can't hear him.
Mark,
Can't hear you, Paul.
Can't hear me? Yes, can you hear me?
Well, I can go if you want to keep going with me. If the sound is off.
Am I still off?
Yeah,
Sorting on, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me,
Well,
Mark?
I mean, much depends on your reading of of Revelations. You know, because when we talk about the mark of the beast and the beast himself, you know, if you read Revelation 13, you'll see that he's a quasi-religious political figure. Now, most theologians would read Revelation with the view of the early church in mind. This was a suffering church, a church that was being persecuted by the Roman Empire. And of course, what we see in the scriptural times is that emperor worship was compulsory for many. Okay, so you know, when we read scripture, we have to first look at the context of the original listeners that received it. And when we talk about mark of the beast, yes, it is something to do with buying and selling. Now, if you didn't worship the emperor in the 1st century, you would have been for the chop. You would have had your life made misery. And you know, whether or not we believe there's a second fulfillment of that in the future very much depends on how you read the scriptures. So it is an issue, and there are differences of opinion on this. Some believe that Revelation is symbolic. Some believes it's speaking only into the 1st century. Some believes there is a futurist view of it. But we need to understand it from the perspective of the 1st century, the people who received it, full of mystery. It's called apocalyptic, which is a genre of writing. The mark of the beast. I struggle to understand how the vaccine could be the mark of the beast, because it is not stopping us from buying or selling. And it's not being administered to us by a quasi-religious political figure. At the moment, the Prime Minister is not claiming to be a religious figure. I think we can all safely agree with that this evening. But you know, there are other concerns. Yeah, we've talked about the chips. I'm a few years older than some of the people on this panel. When I was growing up, it was barcodes.
Uh-huh.
You know, nowadays we talk about barcodes and we just think, well, what's a barcode? You know, I remember when I used to be a retail manager, and we used to use those kind of clicky guns to put prices on people. It's really showing my age now. But, you know, we've been through a lot of changes in recent years. But those are some of the theological reflections.
Fantastic. I mean, we still have Dr. Garrick, who's also a theologian as well here, and Shermara Fletcher. We haven't had a chance to introduce you properly, but we want to get you involved in the conversation. So Shermara, just quickly introduce yourself, and I don't know if you've got anything to say on this topic, but we want to kind of juice this out a bit, because there are people out there that really have real concerns about that, and I really enjoy what Reverend Phil has just said.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on this amazing.
Mute.
We can't hear you.
Am I mute? Can you hear me now?
She's muted herself.
We're on mute on Clubhouse.
Okay.
Just press the audio button on Clubhouse.
Oh, Clubhouse. Okay.
There you go, yeah.
That's it.
Okay, perfect. Is that better?
Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Just saying thank you so much for having me on this amazing platform, in this conversation, a critical conversation for this hour. Just going on the theme of end times, I was really thinking about this because in public discourse, in our public narrative, this is something that is coming up a lot. You know, we're seeing a lot of death. There's a lot of worry. There's a lack of control over what people want to do. So naturally, you do start thinking, okay, is this what Revelation is talking about? Is this an eschatology end time doctrine that we're going through at the moment? But as I was really thinking about it, I thought to myself, one of the ways that we can answer this question is actually by asking the question, what is the state of the church? Is the church established? Is it in order? Is it healthy? Is it fully operating in its mandate to preach the gospel to the world? because Matthew 24:14 clearly tells us in this prophecy that the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So before we start looking solely at external forces, the powers in high places, all these things that, yes, we do need to do, let us first look within. Before we look at the microchips, we will know if we're in the end time by the state of God's church and its ability to effectively and unadulterated spread God's gospel as a testimony to the world. So Christ can't return until this message is proclaimed to the whole world. So this suggests that there's more to do. That this pandemic has shut down institutional notions of the church as we know it, but it hasn't shut down the bride God's people. So we've had to be creative. We've had to look, logging online for church, people coming on that haven't come before. So if we really want to know if we're in the end times, I would really advise us to look at our church, look at its condition, and if it's been effective in public life. That's what I would say to that.
Can you hear me now? You can hear me? Oh, brilliant. I'm back. Yeah, no. Thank you for that, Shermara. And I would just like to agree with the Reverend there when he talked about approaching the Book of Revelations within its original context, because I think that's really important. Just to add to your point about Barry Smith in the 90s, I think he did a lot of damage in terms of our perception of what to expect in times. Because the mark of the beast in Revelations 13, it's really talking about the Emperor Nero and a figure that's to come who's going to be like the Emperor Nero. So what John is actually saying, there was something that the Hebrews, that the Israelites do called they used to make people's names into numbers, basically. So when you look at the number 666, and then John says, if anybody has wisdom or knowledge or understanding, they'll know the person I'm talking about. It's actually referring to the Emperor Nero, because in Latin, if you add up what his name, the Emperor Nero, who was the ruler of Rome at the time, it comes up to 666. And we know John is talking about the Emperor Nero because we have something called a textual variance. Those are other manuscripts within our Greek text. And in the eastern side of the Roman Empire, when we get the textual manuscripts from there, the number's not actually 666. It's 616, because they thought that the Western Church had got that wrong. So when they wrote down in their manuscripts, they changed it to 616. And when you add it up within that part of the empire, it comes up to Nero. So when John was talking about the mark of the beast and the beast himself, he's talking about the Emperor Nero, who was the ruler of Rome, was persecuting the Christians. Now, I don't think he's only talking about the Emperor Nero. I think he's talking about the Emperor Nero in their context, but John also has, an end time perspective in view. So I think John is also telling us that in the end times, we should be expecting a world ruler, who is going to take on the place of Nero, because that's something that the early church feared, that Nero was going to resurrect and come and persecute the church again. And in John's mind, he thinks that a figure like that is going to come about in the end times. So the mark itself, I believe, is actually representing worship of this emperor, obedience to this ruler that's to come. I don't think it's a physical mark. And lastly, then I'm going to handle someone else. The reason why I don't think it's a physical mark is because where the people are going to be marked on their foreheads and on their right arms. And I think John, being a Jew, he's playing off, or he's picking up from a Jewish concept where the Jews in the Old Testament were commanded to wrap the Torah around their arm and around their foreheads, representing that we're going to believe the way God wants us to believe, and also around their hand, representing we're going to act the way God wants us to act. And when you jump straight into Revelation 14, you see that the people of God, the 144,000, have then got the mark, the seal of their God. Where is it? It's on their forehead. Okay, so I think it's a lot to do with worship. It could end up being a physical mark, but I think we need to, as Reverend Phil said, we need to look at it from a more well-informed biblical perspective. And for me, that's why the coronavirus vaccine cannot be the mark of the beast.
That's really good, and thank you, Paul, for that. And we'd love to get Reverend Alton involved as well in this listening. Got anything? Can you?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Paul. very informative, very plain. I think one of the problems is the scripture is very flat, and so they take it, and so because John is
Sorry, one second, Reverend. Ensure that all our panelists, you have one device with sound on and your other device is turned off, us we're going to get feedback. Okay. Sorry, Reverend Wilson, please do continue.
Okay. We've only got one there. Also, can you guys turn some of your devices? Also, we must remember the revelation of the apocalyptic is about revealing. It's not about fear. Who's the right? And so it's about revealing things to come in John's time, not Perusia, i.e. the second coming of Jesus. He does, however, give us a lot of points, as Paul was saying, to what we could expect from a ruler. Some of our churches, we tend to read scripture too literally and take things out of context. For example, the 144,000 that in Revelation has been taken out of context by the Jehovah's Witness movement. Saying 144,000 are going to be saved. Whereas in Revelation 7 shows that there's thousands, millions, millions of people worshiping God. But we must also recognize that Jesus said that in the last days, obviously, knowledge will increase. And I do believe that we are in the last days. And knowledge has increased. But not only secular knowledge, but spiritual knowledge. We have to increase in our spiritual knowledge. And you can see with even this new vaccine, it's novel because people are using new technology, new ways to fight against the virus. And people are equating this new knowledge to having some sort of control. Today I went to myself. I believe that we have to protect one another. And as Scripture says, we want us to be well in our bodies how we are in our souls. Okay, that's what John himself writes. He wants us to be well in our bodies how we in our souls. And as Shermara was quoted, how is the church? How prepared? What COVID-19 is shown is that as a church, we're not very well prepared because we have said that the church is the building. We are the church. And because we are the church, the body of Christ, we have to protect ourselves. We have to protect our one another. We have a mandate to do that. And if it means taking the medicine, I don't believe of our mentality, because there are so many people, they're having made it for food, rather than food for medicine. But when it comes to taking the vaccine to protect yourself, there's the same belief nonsense that there's microchips in it and nanobots in it. It's a lot of foolishness. Have a look. You can find out the ingredients of these vaccines. Okay? So from a theological perspective, we have a responsibility to protect those who are vulnerable amongst the community and also to protect the general public, to love them to the kingdom, not to frighten them. Of course, he's going to come back, but he's going to come back for us when we have to be ready.
Okay, we're having a little bit of problem with you, Pastor Alton. So just quickly, really good. Having a few different questions. Some people are saying that is it the fact that maybe we are being prepared for this system to come into place, just like we've been. Everyone has been told to stay in their house. If you're going to travel, you have to take the vaccine. It's like a preparation for this system that has been put in place. As much as people might say, because it sounds like what's been said that the mark has already happened through the first era of the church. So we're not having to worry about that now. Just to try to get clarity on, are we saying that we don't have to worry about any mark or any system of not buying and selling because that's already happened? And do you think that maybe people are being prepared for something greater with the way they're dealing with this vaccine?
Can I jump in there and say something? I think as a Christian, you know, I see myself as a Christian first. I'm a Christian doctor. And I always have to fall back on my faith when I'm challenged by perplexing things. And I fall back on what I feel is being impressed on my heart in every situation. So it comes back to faith and your core beliefs of what you stand on as a Christian and what you believe your purpose, your outlook, the protection that you feel as a person offered to you because of your faith. Now, that faith can be very practical. It's not just the sort of, you know, jump off a building and God will catch me sort of faith. There are practical things that we can do where we don't always have the answers. We have to, you know, I have to often come to the point where I realize I don't actually have all the answers, but I have to trust. And what does trust look like for me? Trust looks like for me in terms of having counsel. So it says in the Bible, in the multitude of counselors, there's wisdom. So for things where I don't know, I seek out those who know. You know, I try to find out the right answers. And there comes a point where you just have to put your faith into action based on all the research you've done and the counsel you've had around you. You know, that is something that I have to do every day as a Christian and someone living out my faith, even in the work that I do.
If I may as well.
Yes, please.
Thank you. So I was raised in a Pentecostal background, and in coming up in the church, especially within a sort of classical Pentecostal church, my grandparents and people of their generation was always saying the signs of the times are everywhere. In fact, their entire theology was based on Jesus is coming soon. Every service would conclude with an altar call that you accept Jesus today because tomorrow is not guaranteed, it's not promised, and he will return now. And where will your soul be if he was to return at this very moment? If there was a report of an earthquake or another natural disaster on the news, they would see that and interpret that immediately as another sign of the time, which they say, you know, these things are spoken about in Matthew 24. There will be wars and rumors of wars, nations against nations and kingdom against kingdoms. And look, when you see these things, look up, because, you know, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And so certainly with that sort of thinking and theology embedded in multiple generations of especially Black Pentecostals, it is not unthinkable to say that in the current situation that individuals will be thinking it is the sign of the time, it's the end times, Christ is returning soon, the mark is upon us, and therefore we ought to be careful even in participating in this, because if we were to take the mark, we won't get into heaven. And I think that's the primary concern there, is if we take this vaccine and it is indeed the mark of the beast, then we forfeit our position of eternity with God himself. And so really that's the traditional thinking that we're coming from. Certainly in the church that I'm a part of, the New Testament Church of God, we have what we call the Declaration of Faith, and it's various articles that talks about what we believe in, what our doctrine is. In Article 13, it says we believe in the pre-millennial second coming of Jesus Christ, first to resurrect the righteous dead and to catch away the living saints. Second, to reign on the earth for 1,000 years. And, you know, I'm sure the theologians in the room can talk about this more, in that depending which category you fall into, you may be an amillennial, you may be a post-millennial, or you may be a premillennial. And from my distinction, it is a premillennialistic view that the New Testament Church of God ascribes to, which is that Christ will return before that sort of 1,000-year sort of millennium of peace where the saints will reign. But after he returned to catch away the saints who are alive, but also to raise the dead in Christ. Following that, there will be a period called the tribulation period, a 7-year period, the first 3.5 years of which is characterized by peace. The second half is a time of great suffering, which is when the Antichrist will be about and the mark will be revealed. So if we were to follow this narrative, and I know interpreting the book of Revelation is complex, we've heard that. If we were to follow this narrative, then basically what we're saying is, for those of us who believe in this pre-millennial second coming of Christ, basically what we're saying is then that if the mark is upon us, then Christ would have already returned. He would have caught away the saints, and we would have been left behind. I wonder if that would be a harsher reality to contend with than the reality of even saying, is the mark of the beast upon us? So that's just something I want to bring to the narrative, especially for maybe Black Pentecostals who are part of this viewing audience.
We're just going to bring in Raekwan and just to hear a little young voice. He wants to say something. Yeah, go on, Raekwan.
Raekwan?
Raekwan.
Raekwan, can you hear us?
Can hear you now.
Yeah, I can hear you. Just completely silent.
For being a young millennial, even younger than Z, and hearing all of this, sometimes people, it's the young, we've been brought up with a lot of these sort of theologies, so we've been contending with this, and we are probably closer to seeing Jesus than some of the Gen Zs, okay? So the question is really, how does that make you guys think when you're thinking about your future? Because I've heard some people, when we was growing up, some people weren't even going to get mortgages, someone didn't want to, people just have checked out from even life because Jesus was coming anytime soon. So what is your thought, being such a younger person, dealing with this sort of mindset of the end times?
I mean, with what Dr. Garrick just said about the mark of the beast, I was thinking the exact same thing, because I feel like a lot of people are very quick to be like, everything's the mark of the beast. Because as Reverend Phil said, in his day it was barcodes, but I know just a few years ago it was contactless payments, and that it wasn't that long ago. I know church people are saying we're not using our credit cards, we're not using contactless payments because it's the mark of the beast. But I think for young people and for me personally, when we look at the parable of the talents, I know up until Jesus comes, I'm going to live my life up until the rapture comes, because I'm not going to be that person that is going to sit there and just be like, there's no point in me doing ministry, because me doing that and starting this and Jesus comes tomorrow, I've started something for no reason. There's no point in me saying, oh, I'm not going to do this to make myself better, or I'm not going to get a mortgage, buy a car, learn how to drive, because the reality of it is no one knows the moment, no one knows the time. So if we're doing that, we're sitting there, sitting on our hands up until that day. And I don't want Jesus to say to me, I gave you this talent, I gave you that talent, and you did nothing. I gave you these opportunities and you didn't.
Fantastic. And you know what? I think
Mark, you're muted again.
Sorry. We are rapidly running out of time, and the questions are really flowing on this chat. Some people are, I think where we're coming from, that there are a lot of people that are still very skeptical, but this question is, if you ask a Chinese, a Middle Eastern Christian, if they aren't seeing persecution, because we are in the lukewarm Revelation 3 church, haven't seen hard times yet, doesn't mean that Christians aren't seeing tribulation. We in the West are about to see things change exponentially. So, like some people, there's still a heavy weight of thinking that a lot of people still really believe that there is an end time cataclysm going to happen. And some of the theology, it's like I think people are trying to hear, are you actually saying we can relax in the fact that there isn't a mark of the beast to come? And we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry about a system that is going to overtake people. Or can we say these things have already happened through the theology of what people have explained that may have happened in the early church, that we can relax from that paranoia now?
Can I jump in there?
Yes.
I mean, you know, Raekwan, I thought what you just said a moment ago was awesome. Thank you. Great message. I think we can conclude. Let's pray. No, it's very, very good, very good. And you know, the fact is that, you know, what you're saying, Mark, you know, it's a question of both and I think it's already been said. You know, we've got to be vigilant, and that's what Jesus says. You know, we've got to live as though today's the last day. You know, and we've seen so many stories over the years. Back in the 70s, there was the late great Planet Earth, and people were reading the newspapers alongside Revelation. And today we've got this. The church, I mean, there has been some comment in the chat about, you know, churches facing persecution now. They are places where you'd be thrown in prison for being a Christian. You know, all sorts of things, but that's happened throughout history. I mean, speaking as a Baptist, you know what they did to us when we were invented in the 17th century, 16th century? The Anglicans drowned us because we wanted to be baptized again, where you can stay underwater. I don't tell the bishops that, by the way. I have to get along with them, you know, but that's a good point, you know. But I think for me, one of the best comments on this came from a pope in the 1960s, a guy called Pope John. Someone asked him once, you know, what would you do if Jesus came back tomorrow? And he turned around without missing a beat and went, look busy. And the fact is, we do need to look busy for him and be living a life for him.
Yeah, and that's amazing. I really really appreciate what's going on, and the questions are rolling in. I'm just trying to get through all the questions as much as we can. I really believe we're probably going to have a different session where we can dig more into some things, but at the moment, Shermara, I don't know if you want to come in and share anything.
Yeah.
On
can you hear me?
We can hear you on YouTube and Facebook, but I don't think we can hear you on Clubhouse.
She's on mute on Clubhouse.
Okay. Oh, it's not allowing me to unmute. Okay, I might have Clubhouse. Apologies.
I hear you on Clubhouse, Shermara.
Can you hear me on this? Oh, it's not allowing me to.
Question that people are saying that they are very concerned a lot with the technology and things that we may not even be saying. That technology has been increased. I think we mentioned maybe earlier that, you know, with nanotechnology, there is that possibility of them being able to get chips within in our skin and in our blood and so forth. Do we believe that? Actually, that they have the technology to start to create
a sort of system where people cannot buy or sell.
Is there an anxiousness about what's going on with technology, or is it something we embrace? I like what Reverend Phil was saying, that we have to stay watchful, and that's what Christ has told us to do. But is there a paranoia? Is there a fear of technology with what's going on in our future? Yeah.
Paul, they can't hear you apparently.
We can.
We can hear you in Clubhouse.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
We can't hear you on Facebook or on YouTube though.
YouTube.
Oh, YouTube. Don't worry, we can hear you. Just continue, sir.
Apologies everyone for the sound complications. We're looking to try and get this sorted as quickly as possible.
Mark, you want to ask that question again? Oh, Paul.
Excellent, excellent. Shermara, I don't know if you're able to.
Can you hear me now?
Can, yes, we can.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Yeah, just based on what I've heard tonight, it's also made me think about why we have to come with the reason of we have the Antichrist. And it really made me look at the Enlightenment ideology, which I do really think is influencing the way that we think, our way of knowing, how we articulate events, because the Enlightenment says that there's a science to mankind, and that the history of mankind is one of progress, and that it can be continued with right thinking. So the Enlightenment, it argues that human life and character can be improved using education and reason. So I think this is really influencing how we even cope in our ability or inability to cope with the pandemic. And I think this is really infiltrating our understanding of why we are here, and even our struggle to fathom the reality of a threat to human life, because it threatens our idea of progress. It threatens our ideas of humans becoming better, becoming greater masters of our environment. And we feel the need to reason and to understand what is going on. So I think it's challenging us, because 1 + 1 must equal 2 in Western thought. So if there's a pandemic and we're a Christian, that must equal end times. We can't fathom that actually there might be a threat to human life. There's been pandemics throughout all of history. We see it in the Old and New Testament with leprosy, we see it with measles. There's been vaccinations that have taken out, pandemics. And I don't proclaim to be an expert in this field. I wouldn't want anyone to think that I am. But there's vaccinations have taken out pandemics in the past. And also, from what I've understood and learned, vaccinations aren't necessarily to cure, is to stop a progress, is to stop the progression of something worse. So then why haven't we interrogated other vaccinations? Why haven't we interrogated even Ebola when there was having the vaccination for that? Or is it because that happened in Africa and didn't affect us in the West? Or is that because it happened to people over there and it's now messing with our economy and our economics? Now it's a huge pandemic and a global problem, and we now see something happening. So yeah, I'm just really intrigued by, in the West, we don't actually have independent thought. You might think you're thinking independently, but even if we look at postmodern thought, it actively undermines authority and authoritative voice. So we live in an environment where we can't take authority. We always have to dispute right and wrong. It's always a clash of opinion. We are, even in your schooling, we are taught to criticize, to analyze. That can't be the truth. So actually, when we're saying we don't want the vaccine, is that you? Has your thought been shaped by where you live? Is your thought actually independent? So yeah, I would put that to challenge us as well.
Can I say
That's amazing. I think really, as we are coming down, obviously some people are it's theology, is it vaccine? What we're dealing with? The reality is some of our theology is stopping people from taking vaccines. Some of people's understanding is stopping people from moving forward by taking a vaccine. And I think what you said there, Shermara, was really brilliant in the fact of it's not just a cure that we're trying to say that this thing is doing. Back to medical facts is that we are trying to prevent something more dramatic happening to people. And hopefully we've been trying to provide facts today on the medical side and actually just some of the thinking when it comes to theology and where we are with our thinking. I think what I'd love is as for you guys to just be able, as we're looking into this vaccine, clearly what we're saying is, number one, which Paul was saying, is we won't be deceived by, oh, you took a vaccine, aha, that was a mark of the beast and you didn't know, it's too late, sorry, you've got to go. Jesus ain't trying to catch you out like that. So it's actually relaxing in the fact that even if you choose a vaccine or not, that we're looking at the vaccine not being the mark of the beast, because number one, there is no way of it being something that's going to be able to stop you buying or selling anything at this precise moment in life. But number two, it's been put in your arm, it's not even in your hand or your forehead. But also, it's actually something that we are looking at, this mark, or whatever it may be, is not something that's just going to catch you out because you didn't know it was the mark. It's actually going to be something you would have to make a choice of, So just kind of, we're coming closer to wrapping things up now, but I'd like you, as our guest, I know Reverend Alton, I haven't heard much of you, obviously, the sound was a bit up and down, but be able just to speak to some of the people, especially knowing today, you have just got your vaccine today, right now, before you got on the show, you went and got your vaccine. Just why did you get your vaccine? And as a Christian, as a reverend, as a pastor, as someone that looks over the flock, why did you make that decision? And how does that make sense to you?
Well, I've just come back from a funeral today. I was officiating at the funeral of a 96-year-old lady. And whilst I was driving back, the undertaker was telling me that last week he buried 2 Jamaican men, both 43 years old, died from COVID. So COVID is real. And as Dr. Chichi was saying earlier, you can pass it on without it affecting you. And so therefore, I want to protect those who I love and those who I come into contact with. This virus, although it's global and it affects everyone, there is a great pandemic as well, which is climate justice. And the Christian church, very good about it. Can you hear me okay? We need to put down. Okay, we need to put things in perspective, and as Christians, we have to care for ourselves and also for our environment. And so we need to really be responsible in how we behave. And putting out all these conspiracy theories on social media is irresponsible, very irresponsible. Thank you.
I'm just wondering if you'd like to, Reverend Phil, would like to just come back just to be able to share some of your last thoughts.
Well, it's been really helpful to talk this evening and to hear all of these different views. It's a good space, and we do need to keep talking and thinking. I've got a big echo in my headphones, by the way, so something's happening. That's better. Oh, thank goodness for that. But yeah, it's very weird when that happens. Very, very weird. But yeah, no, I do think that really, as we look at the pandemic, as we look at the church's response to the pandemic, we have a role to play, both in the way that we are caring for our communities and being people of justice and mercy and truth and love, but also in the way that we speak prophetically into our nation. And, we do have to keep completely aware of these times. We don't know when Jesus is returning. There's been some chat about that in the chat tonight. I believe he's coming back. He hasn't come back yet, but we need to be absolutely ready for that moment and be working towards that moment and watching and praying and seeking to be active and seeking to make a difference in this world. And I believe that we can again in the church.
Absolutely, Reverend Phil. And I think you touched on something. Can you hear me now?
A lot tonight. One of those phrases that will go into the dictionary. You're on mute.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Hello. Can people hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Yeah. Reverend Phil, thank you for what you just said. And I think you highlighted something when you're talking about how we as a church want to be communicating and what we want to be encouraging. And in Paul's letter to the Galatians in chapter 5, he talks about the fruits of the Spirit. And when he's talking about that, he's talking about when we're under the law and when we're under the Spirit, and what we as Christians should be portraying and what should be flowing out from us when we communicate our messages, when we communicate our love, when we share with our congregations and with the people that we encounter. And so it says this in Galatians 5:22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, control. And against such things there is no law. And those things can only be encouragements to us as a church moving forward. Those things can only be things that bring out the best of people. And we as a church are called to do that, to move in confidence, to bring out the best in people, not to do things that will bring anxiety or fear or pain or worry, but to bring out those things that bring about joy, that bring about peace, that bring about love, but ultimately that bring about a hope moving forward. And it's wonderful to hear so many different church leaders and experts talk about their fields in such a way that says, we want to help make you bring about an informed choice in your decision, whether that is to take the vaccine or not, whether that is to share this message of hope. But ultimately, we are trying to encourage you to make the best choice that you physically can.
Sorry, thank you for that, Bejoy. Fantastic words, very encouraging and inspiring words you've shared with us. I think just before we wrap up, we really do need to wrap up because we've literally gone over time. For those of you that are just joining, hi, welcome. I wasn't sitting here being awkward. I was actually trying to run all the back behind the scenes things. I was trying to make it look very natural. So I hope I did a good job at it. Is in the comment section, we keep getting a common theme. I'm just hoping that one of the doctors can just really speak truth to this. They're saying that although you take the vaccine, you can still catch COVID. So is it really a cure? I know you've touched on already, but I guess the skepticism or the patterns I'm reading in the comment section is that what is the point in taking this vaccine if really you can still get sick anyway, if it doesn't completely and fully work? And if it doesn't actually help to strengthen the immune system. So one doctor speaking to that. And then after that, if we can have one of our theologians, there's still a lot more conspiracies in the comment section, which I'm consistently trying to read through, that this is the end times, that people are blind, that people's eyes are closed. And I'm hoping that one of the theologians can speak, because I think one thing that we've probably not touched on upon as much is that if we are Christians, we have the Holy Spirit, which is the mind of God, the opinion of God. And if the Holy Spirit lives inside of us, why would the Holy Spirit not let us know that Jesus is coming back tonight at midnight, midnight, so we must all pack our bags? So I think we also need to speak about that, or else we're left to mysticism and we're left to trying to put all these different conspiracies together. So if we just have a doctor speak into the what's the point of taking it if there's still a chance that you can still get COVID, and then if one of you can just jump in and just speak about the end times. Thank you.
I think that we know that these vaccines that we've discussed have good efficacies, And as Dr. Garrick has said, and he's described earlier on, that he has physically seen the vaccines underneath the microscope. He's worked on it, he's sequenced it, he's, you know, the vaccines that we have gone through really ethical trials and have been found to be effective. Now, as a doctor, as a GP, I can never say that a medicine is 100%. You know, there aren't, that doesn't exist, because people are different and can affect people differently. So we're not, you know, no one has said on this platform that it's 100%, you know, guarantees prevention of serious illness, but it's fairly close to it. It's fairly close to it, and it's the best that we have. So I think that we have to understand that we are in a pandemic. We are seeking to bring back normality. We're seeking to prevent more deaths, because we're seeing deaths in huge numbers daily. And we need to stop this. We need to bring a stop. We need to pull it back a little bit more for all of our sake. So we're not saying that you definitely won't catch COVID, but we are saying that there are proven things that we have available. We have the vaccines. There are, you know, we will still encourage you to wear your mask, wash your hands, keep your distance. With all of these things that we have, these are tools, these are weapons that we've got at the moment that we can use. So we're just saying to you tonight, let's use everything that we have at our disposal to fight this disease for all of us. And we are saying that in the most sincere way that we can, without any agendas. None of us are employed by Pfizer or AstraZeneca. We are just saying to you, this is what we are seeing, and this is our experience, and this is what we are standing behind that can help to protect you. Don't know if you have anything to add, Dr. Garrick, to that, but I think Esther just...
Thank you, and I think you've said that incredibly well. What I will say to people, the facts are, as was stated, nothing is ever foolproof, and you would have seen the records of coming out, you know, up to 90%, sometimes as low as 60% efficacy. With that being said, I want us to take this with a real sort of pragmatic and wise view, in that the most data we have so far is that these vaccines will bring protection for up to 5 months. And we don't know what that looks like beyond that period. And of course, this is just the start of the process. We have a long way to go. We won't be able to give you full answers until another year from now, perhaps. We'll be back on something like this, asking, what have we learned after a year? So that's just the pragmatic view. And when we're talking about efficacy, we're literally, what that word translates to mean is producing the intended or desired results. We know it does in a clinical trial setting, and this is why we have confidence in it. And you are right to ask questions as to whether or not it will do the same in a population-wide setting, and time will tell us that. The degree of confidence in that it will do the same is very, very high. It's very significant indeed, and therefore I would encourage you all to protect yourselves, protect those around you. And also there's another matter at play here, and it's something that I want to say to Raekwan in particular. If we're honest about it, what the pandemic has done is really challenged us on our theology and our model of church, in that what we were doing prior to this has just come under scrutiny in a greater way than before. And unfortunately, Raekwan, you and your generation have having to go on social media and see prophets being stoned because their predictions have come out incorrect, inaccurate. They've said the pandemic would go away by May. The pandemic is still with us. We've gone on Facebook, you've seen church leaders and pastors being stoned because of their view and perspectives on racism and sort of commentary around Black Lives Matter and so on and so forth. You've seen all these things emerge before your eyes. What we're seeing now is a question of, will the vaccine actually get us back to normal life? Raekwan, the truth is, this calls the church to wake up. And as much of we've been gathered online, it's generation like yours that actually made it possible for us to get online in driving the technology and the innovations behind the scenes, which means in this season, you had to step up as a leader. And coming out of this season, you should not just be put back into a box, be concealed and pushed away into some corner. Because the truth of the matter is, what the pandemic has taught us is that in coming out of this, there's a bigger fight to be had. It's not just a fight as to whether or not there'll be a virus or not a virus. In a post-COVID world, and let me be pragmatic on that, given the new virus variants that are emerging, it's going to be a very long time before we can say there is a post-COVID world. The chances are that if we have a new variant come through, we'll have to keep adapting and developing new vaccine strategies year on year in order to respond to that. So there is no quick fix to this. That's just the pragmatic and the truthful view. But in line with that, I want to say to you, in terms of your walk of faith and being in church and you want Christ to come back and find you at work, here's the work that comes after this. We're going to emerge into a world of educational disparities, in that a lot of our young people, including your peers, wouldn't have been able to get the standard of education that has been required. We're going to be emerging into a world of economical disparities. So many businesses will be closed. So many livelihoods would have been affected as a result. A world ravaged with mental health problems because so many people have been affected significantly within their mental health during the lockdown period. So you have to think about these things. And one thing that this should have taught you is this thing which I believe nobody's looking at. The amount of money that the government has poured into responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. And yes, it is right that they have done that because it's a public health crisis. It tells me quite clearly that if the government wanted to eradicate something like homelessness a long time ago, they could have done that. The money is there, the capital is there. There just needs to be the mindset and the will to do it. COVID-19 is no respecter of persons. It affects you whether you're wealthy or unwealthy. And because it comes to all of our doors, affecting all of our communities, it means that we all have to respond to it. When homelessness and other things like that, other sort of disparities and injustices that we see in society are far away from our door, perhaps we don't have the same mindset to respond and deal with it quickly by putting in the capital and the finances that are required to do that. So just going ahead, Raekwan, I will say you have an advocacy and a form of activism to participate in as it relates to your faith, in that in this post-COVID world, whenever it may appear, and even starting right now, what will it look like for those who are, poor, those who are disenfranchised, those who have been affected by systematic inequalities and so on and so forth? That's really something that is going to be addressed, and the church is now being called to not just protest, to not just be caught in conspiracy theories or alternative facts, but to also engage with politics, engage with policy, how that's developed, how that's coming about. And this is where you're gonna have to get clued up, my brother, and get enlightened and let your imagination spark to begin to imagine the world that could be even from now. So those are just my final 2 cents.
If I had a bombs, if I had a bomb sound, I would be dropping the bombs. Pow, 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 pow.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Garrick. And that's the bigger conversation, is where do we go from here as a church? And I'm so glad, Raekwan, that you are on this call tonight, because so many conversations are happening and they keep forgetting about Generation Z, who are our future. And I'm so glad that you took the call and you came up here and you spoke, and I hope that we have so many more Generation Zs come on. Shermara, I know that you're ready to drop some bombs. I can see you do that thing with your lip. It's like
Jesus. No, this has been absolutely fantastic. But yeah, I would say this, and before I go into what I'm going to say, I can understand, I don't want to decry anybody's views and opinions, because based on cultural understanding, how you've grown in church, your theology, that will shape how you see certain things. So I'm not here to knock you down or say that you're wrong. We just might have different opinions. So I do want to premise what I'm going to say with that. But what I would say is that we hear the saying that the devil is in the detail. And I really do believe that is true. And I put a question for us to consider. What about our phone? We're talking about the end times. We're talking about the mark of the beast. What about our phone? What about our Instagram? What about our Facebook and social media that can track what we're doing even when we're not on Facebook? I can think of something and it will appear on my phone. Through AI and analytics, our data is already in the hands of others. Your digital mark is already taken. So if the internet closed down permanently, what would happen to our lives? How would we buy and sell? A lot of our buying systems are based on technology, facial recognition to get into your phone. So I say this to say, what if we was told to put down our social media, to give up our phones, our brands, our selfies, our need to be seen? Because as well as the beast and the chick, Apostle Paul also tells me in 2 Timothy 3:2 that in the last days, people become lovers of themselves more than lovers of God. So that is another sign of the end time. So I say that to say, I think personally, I'm not saying God said, the Holy Spirit said, this isn't prophetic, this is my view, that I think this is too out there for the devil. I think the devil is very subtle. There's trickery, pride. You can look at patterns of how the devil, end times, that whole eschatology. There's patterns of how he works. So I don't know. For me, I just think it's too brash. I think it's easy to look at that. What about giving up our phone? I don't think we'd be having this conversation. As I said, our digital mark is out there. So I would say, let's look at this from a wholesome view. Let's look at the things that are subtle, that we're not really thinking about, that we're not really looking at. That shade of grey is 2 shades of grey. It's not necessarily black and white. So what's happening in those nuances? So that's what I would say, but not to knock down anyone, just to give some thoughts for consideration and challenge me as well, if you don't agree. But yeah, that's what I would say. Let's look at the detail. Let's look at the finer print. Let's look at what other things are going on, as opposed to jumping on bandwagons. We can't just read keyboard warriors. We can't read self-proclaimed bloggers, because there's a wealth of information out there. So we do need to look at our sources. How is it credible? Has it been researched by other people? Has it been cross-examined? Is it being peer-reviewed? All these different things. So that's what I would say to the area of myths.
Thank you, Shermara. That's fantastic. Guys, we have gone over time. I was really trying to be like Church English practice. So sorry, Rev Phil. Our culture, we always run over time. So please forgive me.
We run over time too, It's okay.
Really?
Yeah, we're all right,
You just destroyed the stereotype. Thank you for putting me in my place. Pentecostal, charismatic.
Called the remnant, Esther. It's called the remnant.
Yes, the remnant. We run over time. We wish we could continue this conversation. I know most of you are saying that you've got more questions and so forth, but we just want to respect the time of our panelists, as well as those that do need to go put their children into bed and so forth and so forth. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to every single one of you. You have added and contributed such rich and diverse perspectives, as well as factual, scientific facts for all of us to walk away and go and reconsider and consider. So guys, we're coming towards the end. Thank you for every single person that has tuned in this evening. This platform is built to bring about reconciliation of those who are tired of the same traditional institutional church and want to see a church that rise up, speak into culture, prophetically see issues ahead of time and put things into place. And I'm so glad that actually, Shermara, you mentioned the fact about technology. I actually want to bring a futurist, a Christian futurist, who actually has seen technology that can actually take thoughts from your brain and cause your phone to work without you moving your finger at all. And this technology is already here. It's not being developed, it's already here. The key is to get into the minds of human beings. That's another sermon for another day, and I'm making this even longer. So please do watch out for the Runaway platform as we bring on more key speakers, more Generation Zs, more specialists, more passionate Christians, as we hope to empower you and equip you with the tools to engage culture with the kingdom of heaven wrapped in your heart and to make one person famous at the end of this, and that is Jesus. So we're going to close out in prayer. So I'm just going to ask Raekwan, because your generation are going to lead us, can you lead us in prayer and close this out?
Amen. And so right now, Father, I just pray, Lord, that you will cover us and protect us through this pandemic. I pray that you shall give us, you shall take away any spirit of fear that is in anybody. For you said, do not be afraid, Lord. And I pray that as we go through this, that you shall lead us and guide us through it all. Cover us and protect us as we leave now. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen.
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 Thank you so much, Raekwan, and thank you to all my panelists. Guys, take care. Have a great evening, and join us next week. We'll be back next week discussing another aspect of this. We want to talk about trauma, the psychological impact, not just of COVID-19 alone, but even as we have seen the racial tensions of the tragic killing of George Floyd, we have seen it impact and re-traumatize so many people that have faced racism as part of their existence, sadly. So we'll see you next week. Watch out for the flyer. Please do share this before you log out. Thank you, Clubhouse, for your patience. We have to revisit how we include Clubhouse in this, or whether this is the right platform for Clubhouse. But pray for us as we pray for you. And if you have any remarks or any things that you want to tell us to improve this platform, I'm humble, I want to learn more, please do email us at estherabonsu@outlook.com. That's estherabonsu@outlook.com. We also have a pack which I'm going to drop in the comment section below in a moment. I just don't want to mess up my technology, so please do revisit our comment section. We've put together a fact sheet with resources to help and guide you in your decisions to understand which vaccine is probably the best vaccine for you particularly, as well as just other resources to help you maneuver through this. So please do check the comment section. God bless you guys. We love you. Peace out. Say bye, guys. Say bye to them.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.